The day started like any other, with the familiar buzz of high school energy filling the hallways as I made my way to English class. I'm Alex Chun, a junior at Westlake High, just trying to navigate the complicated maze of teenage life while keeping my grades up and my secrets close. I've always been the quiet one, the student who sits in the middle row, not too far back to be labeled a troublemaker, not too far forward to be called a teacher's pet. Just perfectly invisible, which is exactly how I preferred it. Especially since I was still coming to terms with my sexuality, something I hadn't shared with anyone except my best friend Jamie. When our regular English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, announced she'd be out for a week due to a family emergency, the class erupted in the typical celebration that accompanies news of a substitute. For most of my classmates, a substitute meant a free period, a chance to slack off, or at the very least, an opportunity to mess with someone new. For me, it was just another day of trying to blend into the background while silently counting down the minutes until graduation. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The moment he walked through the door the next day, everything changed. Mr. Carter wasn't like the usual substitutes, the retired teachers with outdated methods or the fresh college graduates still figuring out classroom management. No, Mr. Carter walked in with confidence, a messenger bag slung over his shoulder, and a smile that immediately commanded attention. He couldn't have been more than 25, with dark curly hair that fell just above his eyes, which were a striking shade of green behind stylish glasses. He wore a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms decorated with a few tasteful tattoos, something our school usually frowned upon. But somehow, on him, they looked professional and artistic. "Good morning, everyone," he said, placing his bag on Mrs. Peterson's desk. His voice carried a warmth that instantly made the classroom feel smaller, more intimate. "I'm Mr. Carter, and I'll be filling in for Mrs. Peterson this week. I know substitute days can feel like a free pass, but I promise if you give me your attention, I'll make it worth your while." The class responded with the usual mix of skepticism and curiosity. A few of the popular girls in the front row straightened up, suddenly interested in English literature. Even the guys who usually spent the period staring at their phones were looking up, sizing up this new authority figure who didn't quite fit the mold. "Let's start with attendance, shall we?" Mr. Carter picked up the class roster and began calling names. I watched as he moved down the list, occasionally looking up to match faces with names, offering a smile or a nod of acknowledgement to each student. There was something refreshing about the way he pronounced each name carefully, as if making an effort to get it right mattered to him. "Alex Chun." When he reached my name, something unexpected happened. He paused, just for a beat, his eyes scanning the room until they found mine. And then he smiled. Not the polite, professional smile he'd given everyone else, but something warmer, more genuine. It was as if he recognized me, though I was certain we'd never met before. "Here," I said, my voice coming out slightly higher than intended. Our eyes locked for what felt like several heartbeats too long, and I felt a strange flutter in my chest, a sensation I hadn't experienced before. It was disorienting, this sudden connection with a stranger, especially one who was supposed to be just another temporary figure in the revolving door of my education. Mr. Carter nodded and continued with the attendance, but something had shifted in the room, at least for me. I found myself straightening up in my seat, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The way I was sitting, the mess of papers on my desk, even the fact that I'd thrown on my faded blue hoodie this morning without much thought. As the class progressed, Mr. Carter proved to be unlike any substitute, or regular teacher, for that matter, we'd ever had. Instead of simply assigning busy work from Mrs. Peterson's plans, he engaged us in a discussion about the novel we were studying, The Great Gatsby. He moved around the classroom as he spoke, gesturing expressively, his enthusiasm for the material evident in every word. "Gatsby's pursuit of Daisy represents more than just romantic love," he explained, perching on the edge of a desk near the front. "It's about the American dream, about reaching for something that seems just beyond our grasp. Let me explain why this matters to us today. We all have our own green lights across the water, don't we? Those things we yearn for that seem impossible, but keep us moving forward anyway." His words resonated with me in a way literature rarely did. I found myself thinking about my own green light, acceptance, understanding, the freedom to be myself without fear. Throughout the period, I noticed Mr. Carter's gaze returning to me occasionally, especially when he posed questions to the class. Each time our eyes met, that same flutter returned, and I found myself volunteering answers, something I rarely did. "Excellent point, Alex," he said after I shared my thoughts on Gatsby's self-reinvention. "That's a perspective I hadn't considered before." The praise warmed me from the inside out, and I couldn't help but smile. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, there was a collective groan of disappointment, another first for English period. As students gathered their things, Mr. Carter called out the homework assignment, which was to write a short reflection on which character we most identified with and why. "Alex, could you stay for a moment?" Mr. Carter asked as I was packing up my notebook. Jamie, who sat behind me, raised an eyebrow and gave me a knowing smirk before heading out, mouthing, "Tell me everything," as he left. My heart pounding, I approached Mr. Carter's desk, suddenly conscious of the empty classroom and the strange intimacy it created between us. "I noticed you have a copy of Norwegian Wood in your bag," he said, gesturing to the Murakami novel peeking out from my backpack. "It's one of my favorites." "Oh, yeah," I replied, surprised. "I just started it. My sister recommended it." "Haruki Murakami isn't usually on high school reading lists," he said with a smile. "You have good taste. If you like that, I could recommend some other authors you might enjoy." "That would be great," I said, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. This wasn't the conversation I'd expected to have with a substitute teacher. "I'll make a list for tomorrow," he promised. It's refreshing to see a student with an interest in literature beyond the curriculum. As I left the classroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. It wasn't just the literary connection. It was the way he looked at me, the way he seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts. For someone who had spent so much time trying to be invisible, being seen, really seen, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next day, I found myself taking extra care with my appearance before school, swapping my usual hoodie for a button-up shirt I rarely wore, running a comb through my perpetually messy hair, even dabbing on a bit of the cologne my mom had given me for Christmas that had been gathering dust on my dresser. Well, Jamie said, leaning against the locker next to mine before first period. "Someone's dressed to impress. This wouldn't have anything to do with our hot new substitute, would it?" "Shut up," I muttered, feeling my cheeks grow warm. "I just felt like looking nice today." "Uh-huh," Jamie said, unconvinced. "And I'm just casually observing that Mr. Carter seemed very interested in what you had to say yesterday, and that he asked you to stay after class, and that you're blushing right now." "He just wanted to talk about books," I said defensively. "It's not a big deal." "If you say so," Jamie replied with a grin. "But for what it's worth, I think he's exactly your type. Smart, good-looking, passionate about boring books." I shoved him playfully, but his words echoed in my mind as we headed to class. Was Mr. Carter my type? Was I even allowed to think of a teacher, substitute or not, in that way? The ethical complications were obvious, but I couldn't deny the connection I felt. When we entered the classroom, Mr. Carter was already there, writing something on the whiteboard. He turned as students filed in, and his eyes found mine almost immediately. His smile widened just a fraction, and he nodded in greeting. I returned the gesture, trying to ignore the way my heart seemed to skip a beat. "Good morning, everyone," he began once we were all seated. "Today, we're going to do something a little different. I've spoken with Mrs. Peterson, and she's given me permission to assign a group project that will count toward your final grade for the unit." A collective groan rose from the class, but Mr. Carter held up his hands. "Before you protest, hear me out. This isn't going to be your typical poster board presentation. I want you to create a modern adaptation of a scene from The Great Gatsby. It could be a short film, a podcast episode, a social media campaign, whatever medium speaks to you. The goal is to translate the themes and emotions of Fitzgerald's work into something relevant to your lives today." As he explained the project details, I found myself genuinely excited about the assignment. It was creative, different, and allowed for personal interpretation, a refreshing change from the usual essay formats. "You'll work in pairs," Mr. Carter continued, "which I've already assigned based on your previous work in this class." He began reading off the partnerships, and I held my breath, wondering who I'd be paired with. When he announced, Alex Chun and Jamie Park, I felt both relief and a twinge of disappointment. Working with Jamie would be easy and fun, but part of me had irrationally hoped for some scenario where I'd be working directly with Mr. Carter. After explaining the project requirements, Mr. Carter gave us the remainder of the period to brainstorm with our partners. Jamie slid into the desk next to mine, a mischievous glint in his eye. So, what scene should we adapt? The one where Gatsby stares longingly at the green light, yearning for something he can't have. Jamie wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. You're the worst, I said, but I couldn't help laughing. Let's focus on the project, okay? I was thinking maybe the party scene, but reimagined as a modern influencer's house party or something. As we discussed ideas, I was acutely aware of Mr. Carter moving around the classroom, checking in with different groups. When he finally made his way to our desks, I tried to appear casual, though my heart was racing. How are you two doing? He asked, leaning slightly against my desk. I could smell his cologne, something subtle and woodsy that made it hard to concentrate. We're thinking of adapting the first party scene, Jamie explained, mercifully taking the lead since my brain seemed to have temporarily stopped functioning. But making it about social media influencers and the fake personas people create online. Mr. Carter nodded appreciatively. That's a brilliant angle. The parallel between Gatsby's carefully constructed identity and the curated personas of social media is really insightful. His eyes shifted to me. What do you think, Alex? Does this concept resonate with you? Put on the spot, I managed to find my voice. Yeah, definitely. I think there's something really powerful about the idea that people are constantly performing versions of themselves, especially online. It's like we're all Gatsby in a way, showing the world what we want them to see. Mr. Carter's expression softened, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the room. That's exactly it, he said quietly. The masks we wear, the parts of ourselves we hide. Fitzgerald understood that struggle almost a century ago, and it's still relevant today. He held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary before straightening up. I'm looking forward to seeing what you two create. As he moved on to the next group, Jamie kicked me under the desk. Dude, he whispered, he is totally into you. Don't be ridiculous. I hissed back, though a part of me wanted desperately to believe it. He's just being a good teacher. A good teacher who can't take his eyes off you, Jamie countered. Trust me, I know these things. I rolled my eyes, but Jamie's words planted a seed of hope that I couldn't quite dismiss. The rest of the class passed in a blur of project planning and stolen glances at Mr. Carter, who occasionally looked up from his desk to meet my eyes with that same warm smile. When the bell rang, Mr. Carter called out over the noise of shuffling papers and closing notebooks. Don't forget, your project outlines are due tomorrow. And Alex, I have that book list for you if you want to stop by during lunch. Jamie nudged me as we gathered our things. Lunch date with the substitute? Scandalous. It's not a date, I insisted, though my stomach flipped at the prospect of spending more time with Mr. Carter. He's just giving me book recommendations. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Jamie teased. Just be careful, okay? I'm all for this romantic tension, but he is still a teacher. I knew Jamie was right to be cautious, but I couldn't help the excitement building inside me at the thought of seeing Mr. Carter again. The morning classes dragged on endlessly, my mind wandering back to English class, to the way Mr. Carter's eyes crinkled when he smiled, to the passion in his voice when he talked about literature. When lunch finally arrived, I made my way to the English classroom, my heart pounding with each step. I paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before knocking softly. Come in, Mr. Carter called, and I pushed the door open to find him sitting at his desk, a sandwich half-eaten beside him, a book open in his hands. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, closing the book and setting it aside. Alex, perfect timing. I was just thinking about our conversation yesterday. You said you had some book recommendations? I said, hovering awkwardly by the door. Yes, absolutely. Come in. Take a seat. He gestured to a desk near his. As I sat down, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of paper. I made you a list with a few notes about each one. Some are similar to Murakami in style. Others are just books I think you might appreciate based on your comments in class. He handed me the paper, and our fingers brushed briefly, sending a jolt of electricity up my arm. The list was handwritten, with neat annotations beside each title, personal touches that showed he'd put real thought into it. This is great, I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you. It's my pleasure, he replied, his voice warm. It's rare to find a student with such a genuine love for reading. Most of your classmates see it as a chore. My mom's a librarian, I explained. Books were kind of my escape growing up, especially when I trailed off, suddenly aware that I was about to share something deeply personal. Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his expression open and encouraging. Especially when what? I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Especially when I was figuring out who I was. Books were the first place I saw people like me. Characters who were questioning their identity, their sexuality. It made me feel less alone. The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I regretted my honesty. But then Mr. Carter's expression softened with understanding. I know exactly what you mean, he said quietly. Literature was my safe haven too, for the same reasons. It's powerful to see yourself reflected in stories when the real world doesn't always make space for you. The implication of his words wasn't lost on me. Was he telling me he was gay too? The possibility made my heart race, but I was too afraid to ask directly. Instead, I said, that's why I want to study literature in college. I want to write stories that might help someone else feel seen. That's a beautiful aspiration, Mr. Carter said, his eyes shining with what looked like pride. You have a gift for insight, Alex. Your comments in class show a depth of understanding that's rare for someone your age. The compliment warmed me from the inside out. Thanks. It means a lot coming from you. We fell into an easy conversation about books, writing, and the power of storytelling. Mr. Carter shared his own journey through college and graduate school, his decision to teach, and his hope to publish a novel someday. I found myself opening up about my dreams, my fears about college applications, and my struggle to find my place in the world. Before I knew it, the lunch period was almost over. I should probably go, I said reluctantly, glancing at the clock. I have calculus next period. Mr. Carter nodded, looking equally disappointed that our conversation was ending. Of course, but feel free to stop by any time if you want to discuss any of those books once you've read them. My door is always open. As I stood to leave, he added, and Alex? Thank you for trusting me with your thoughts today. It's conversations like these that remind me why I became a teacher. The sincerity in his voice made my chest tighten with emotion. Thank you for listening, I replied, knowing the words were inadequate to express what this interaction had meant to me. As I walked to my next class, clutching the book list in my hand, I felt lighter somehow, as if sharing a piece of myself with Mr. Carter had lifted a weight I'd been carrying for years. The connection between us was undeniable, though its nature remained ambiguous. Was it merely a teacher recognizing a kindred spirit in a student, or was there something more beneath the surface? The next few days fell into a pattern. In class, Mr. Carter was professional but warm, often calling on me for my opinions and building on my comments with encouraging feedback. After class or during lunch, we'd have brief conversations about books, ideas, or my project with Jamie. Each interaction left me more convinced that our connection was special, though I was careful not to read too much into it. Jamie, of course, was relentless in his teasing. You two have more chemistry than our actual chemistry class, he observed after watching Mr. Carter and me discuss our project outline. It's like watching the beginning of a romance novel. It's not like that, I insisted, though less convincingly each time. He's just being supportive. Supportive with his eyes? Jamie countered. Because his eyes are saying a lot more than good job on your homework. I couldn't deny that there seemed to be an unspoken current running between Mr. Carter and me, but I was also aware of the impossibility of the situation. He was a teacher, substitute or not, and I was a student. Any romantic feelings, even if they were mutual, couldn't be acted upon. On Thursday, Mr. Carter made an announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the class. I've spoken with Principal Gonzalez, and we've received permission for a special field trip tomorrow to the university's rare book collection. They're currently exhibiting first editions of works from the 1920s, including some materials related to The Great Gatsby. It's an opportunity to see the historical context of the novel firsthand. The class responded with mixed enthusiasm, some genuinely interested, others just happy for a day away from regular classes. For me, the prospect of spending a day with Mr. Carter outside the confines of the classroom was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. You'll need to have your permission slip signed and returned by the end of the day, Mr. Carter continued, passing out the forms. We'll leave directly after first period and return before the end of the school day. As he handed me my permission slip, His fingers lingered against mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "I think you'll particularly enjoy this exhibit, Alex," he said softly. "They have some fascinating materials on Fitzgerald's writing process." I nodded, unable to form words with him standing so close, the scent of his cologne making it hard to think straight. Jamie, witnessing the exchange, gave me a knowing look that I pointedly ignored. That night, as I lay in bed, I allowed myself to imagine what the field trip might bring. Walking beside Mr. Carter through the exhibit, discussing the materials together, perhaps a moment alone where we could talk more freely. The fantasy was both sweet and painful, a reminder of the barriers between us. Morning came with a nervous energy I couldn't shake. I dressed carefully in my nicest jeans and a blue button-up shirt that my mom always said brought out my eyes. I spent extra time on my hair, trying to tame the unruly waves into something that looked intentionally styled rather than perpetually messy. "Someone's dressed up for the field trip," my sister Emma commented as I came downstairs for breakfast. "Trying to impress someone? It's a university," I replied, grabbing a piece of toast. "I just want to look presentable." Emma raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. At 17, she was used to my evasiveness and knew when not to pry. At school, the excitement of the field trip created a buzz among my classmates. We gathered in the parking lot, where a school bus waited to transport us to the university. Mr. Carter stood by the bus door, clipboard in hand, checking off students as they boarded. "Permission slip?" he asked when I reached him, though his smile suggested he already knew I'd have it. I handed him the form, signed by my mom the night before. "All set." "Perfect," he said, checking my name off his list. "I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the exhibit." The bus ride to the university was filled with the typical chaos of high school students let loose. Loud conversations, music playing from phones, and the occasional paper airplane sailing over seats. I sat next to Jamie, who spent most of the ride theorizing about what might happen between Mr. Carter and me at the museum. "Maybe you'll get separated from the group," he suggested, wiggling his eyebrows. "A moment alone in the rare book vault." "You've been reading too many romance novels," I said, rolling my eyes. "Nothing is going to happen. He's a teacher, I'm a student, end of story. For now," Jamie said with a knowing smile. "But you won't be a student forever." I hadn't allowed myself to think that far ahead, to imagine a future where the boundaries between Mr. Carter and me might dissolve. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. When we arrived at the university, Mr. Carter divided us into small groups of 4 or 5 students each, assigning a different section of the exhibit to explore first to prevent overcrowding. To my disappointment, I was placed in a group with Jamie and 3 other students, while Mr. Carter would be floating between groups to answer questions and provide additional context. The exhibit itself was fascinating. Glass cases containing first editions of The Great Gatsby, handwritten notes from Fitzgerald, photographs from the 1920s, and other artifacts that brought the novel's era to life. Despite my initial disappointment, I found myself genuinely absorbed in the materials, taking notes for our project and snapping photos of particularly interesting items. About halfway through our scheduled time, as my group was examining a display of 1920s fashion that related to the novel's descriptions of clothing, I felt a presence beside me. Looking up, I found Mr. Carter standing there, his expression thoughtful as he studied the exhibit. The attention to detail in Fitzgerald's descriptions of clothing wasn't just aesthetic, he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear him. It was a commentary on class, on the performance of wealth and status. Gatsby's carefully selected shirts were a costume, part of the identity he created to win Daisy's love. Like armor, I replied, the connection suddenly clear to me. He was protecting himself with these symbols of success. Mr. Carter turned to me, his eyes bright with appreciation. Exactly. We all have our armor, don't we? The things we use to present ourselves to the world, to protect our vulnerable parts. The conversation felt weighted with meaning beyond the literary analysis, as if we were speaking in code about something more personal. Before I could respond, though, one of the museum docents approached our group. "Mr. Carter? We have that special collection item you inquired about ready in the research room, if you'd like to bring a few students to see it." Mr. Carter nodded. "Thank you. I'll select a couple of students who might benefit most from seeing it." He turned to our group. "Alex and Jamie, would you two like to join me?" The item relates directly to the theme you're exploring in your project. Jamie shot me a knowing look as we followed Mr. Carter and the docent to a smaller room off the main exhibit hall. Inside was a table with white gloves laid out and a document in a protective sleeve. This is a draft of a scene that was ultimately cut from the final version of The Great Gatsby, the docent explained. It contains Fitzgerald's handwritten notes in the margins. I'll leave you to examine it. Just be sure to use the gloves provided. As the docent left, closing the door behind her, Jamie suddenly snapped his fingers. Oh, I just remembered I promised to meet Zoe by the photography display. She wanted my opinion on something for our project. You two go ahead and look at the document. I'll catch up later. Before either Mr. Carter or I could protest, Jamie was gone, leaving us alone in the small research room. The setup was so transparent that I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Your friend isn't exactly subtle, is he? Mr. Carter said with a small laugh, breaking the tension. Jamie has many qualities, but subtlety isn't one of them. I agreed, grateful that Mr. Carter was taking it in stride rather than being offended or uncomfortable. Well, since we're here, we might as well examine the document, he said, reaching for a pair of the white gloves. It really is relevant to your project theme. I put on gloves as well, and we leaned over the document together, our shoulders nearly touching. The proximity was dizzying, but I forced myself to focus on the yellowed pages before us. The scene described a moment where Gatsby revealed a more vulnerable side of himself to Nick, discussing his past and the origins of his reinvention. Fitzgerald's notes in the margins questioned whether the revelation was too explicit, whether it undermined the mystery of Gatsby's character. He decided to keep Gatsby more enigmatic in the final version, Mr. Carter explained, his finger hovering above one of the notes without touching the fragile paper. But this gives us insight into what he was thinking, how he understood his own character. It's like seeing behind the curtain, I said, fascinated despite my hyper-awareness of Mr. Carter beside me. The author questioning his own choices, the character he created. That's what I find most compelling about literary archives, Mr. Carter said, his voice warm with passion. They remind us that these works we study weren't born perfect and complete. They evolved through doubt, revision, and difficult choices, just like we do. He looked up from the document, and suddenly we were face to face, inches apart. Time seemed to slow as his eyes met mine, and I saw something shift in his expression, a softening, a moment of unguarded emotion that made my heart race. Alex, he said softly, and the way he said my name felt like a confession in itself. The door opened abruptly, and we both straightened up, putting a respectable distance between us as the docent returned. Finding everything all right? She asked, seemingly oblivious to the moment she had interrupted. Yes, thank you, Mr. Carter replied, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. The document is fascinating. We were just discussing Fitzgerald's revision process. The docent nodded approvingly. It's always interesting to see what authors choose to include and exclude, isn't it? The roads not taken in literature. Her words carried an unintended weight in the context of what had almost happened between Mr. Carter and me. A road not taken, a moment interrupted. As we removed our gloves and prepared to rejoin the main group, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if we hadn't been interrupted, what words might have been spoken in that quiet room. The rest of the field trip passed in a blur of exhibits, group discussions, and careful distance between Mr. Carter and me. Though he continued to engage with all the students professionally, there was a new awareness between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the moment we'd shared, or almost shared. On the bus ride back to school, I sat alone, lost in thought, replaying the day's events in my mind. Jamie, sensing my mood, gave me space, though I could feel his curious glances from across the aisle. As we filed off the bus back at school, Mr. Carter stood by the door, thanking each student for their participation. When I reached him, he handed me a small folded note along with the standard handout he was giving everyone. Some additional resources for your project, he said, his tone neutral but his eyes conveying more. I think you'll find them useful. I nodded, slipping the note into my pocket without looking at it, heart pounding with anticipation. It wasn't until I was alone in the bathroom that I unfolded it and read the carefully written words. Alex, I need to speak with you privately about what happened today. Please meet me in the classroom after school. Mr. Carter. The note was formal, giving nothing away about his thoughts or feelings. It could be a professional boundary-setting conversation or something else entirely. The uncertainty was agonizing. For the remainder of the day, I moved through my classes in a state of distracted anxiety, unable to focus on anything but the upcoming meeting. When the final bell rang, I made my way to the English classroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. I knocked softly on the door, which was partially closed. "Come in," Mr. Carter called, and I entered to find him sitting at his desk, papers spread out before him, his expression unreadable. "Close the door, please," he said, and I did, my hand trembling slightly. "Have a seat." I sat in the desk closest to him, waiting for him to speak, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Mr. Carter took a deep breath, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose before looking directly at me. "Alex, I want to apologize for what happened, or almost happened, at the museum today. It was unprofessional of me to put you in that position." My heart sank. This was indeed a boundary-setting conversation, a rejection of whatever had been building between us. "You don't need to apologize," I said quietly. "Nothing actually happened. But it could have," he replied, his voice tight with emotion. "And that's the problem. I'm your teacher, even if only temporarily. There are ethical boundaries that exist for good reasons." I nodded, looking down at my hands. "I understand. But," he continued, causing me to look up in surprise, "I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a connection with you that goes beyond the typical teacher-student relationship. Your intelligence, your insight, your sensitivity, they're remarkable. In another context, in another time." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between us. My heart, which had been sinking, now soared with a complicated hope. "I feel it too," I admitted, finding courage in his honesty. "I've never connected with anyone the way I connect with you. It's not just a crush or something superficial. It's like you see me, really see me, in a way no one else does." Mr. Carter's expression softened with what looked like both pain and tenderness. "I do see you, Alex. That's what makes this so difficult. But I also have a responsibility as an educator, a responsibility I take seriously." "So what happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to hear it. "Now, we acknowledge the reality of our situation," he said gently. "I'm here for one more day as your substitute. After that, Mrs. Peterson returns, and I move on to my next assignment. Our paths diverge." The finality of his words hit me like a physical blow. "That's it. We just pretend none of this happened." "Not pretend," he corrected. "Remember, acknowledge, but also respect the boundaries that exist for a reason." He hesitated, then added, "But I want you to know that meeting you has been significant for me. You've reminded me of why I love teaching, of the profound connections that can form through literature and ideas." It was a beautiful sentiment, but it felt like cold comfort in the face of what we were both giving up. "It doesn't seem fair," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "To find someone who understands you, who sees you, and then have to walk away because of timing and circumstances. Life rarely gives us perfect timing," Mr. Carter said with a sad smile. "But that doesn't diminish the value of the connection, however brief." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between us. Finally, I gathered my courage and asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "If things were different, if you weren't my teacher, if I was older, would there be a chance for something more?" Mr. Carter looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "In another life, in different circumstances, I believe there would be. But we have to live in this life, with these circumstances." It was both the most hopeful and the most devastating answer he could have given. A confirmation of mutual feelings, coupled with an acknowledgement of their impossibility. "I understand," I said, though my heart rebelled against the resignation in my voice. "Thank you for being honest with me." Mr. Carter nodded, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "Thank you for the same. It's rare to find such maturity and self-awareness in someone your age." As I stood to leave, he added, "Alex, this doesn't diminish what you felt, or what I felt. Some connections, even unfulfilled ones, leave permanent marks on us. I believe this is one of them." His words were a small comfort as I walked out of the classroom, a bittersweet acknowledgement that what we shared was real, even if it couldn't be pursued. The hallway outside was empty, the school day long over, and I leaned against the wall for a moment, processing the conversation and the emotions it had stirred. The next day, Mr. Carter's last day as our substitute, was a study in careful distance. He taught the class with his usual passion and engagement, but our interactions were deliberately professional, our eye contact brief and guarded. It was as if we had both agreed to begin the process of letting go, of respecting the boundaries we had discussed. When the final bell rang, signaling not just the end of the class but the end of Mr. Carter's time at our school, I lingered as other students filed out, wanting one last moment but unsure what to say. "Alex," he said as the room emptied, his voice warm but controlled. "I have something for you." He handed me a book, a copy of Norwegian Wood, but not my copy. This one was newer, with a different cover design. "Open it," he said softly. Inside the front cover, he had written an inscription. "To Alex, may you always find the courage to be authentically yourself, and may the world be worthy of your truth. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Remember that. With admiration and hope for your bright future, Daniel Carter." It was the first time I had seen his first name, a small intimacy that felt significant. The inscription was carefully worded, appropriate, encouraging, nothing that could be misconstrued, but I understood the deeper message beneath the words. "Thank you," I said, clutching the book to my chest. "I'll treasure it." "I know you will," he replied with a gentle smile. "Take care of yourself, Alex. And keep reading, keep writing, keep questioning. The world needs more minds like yours." It wasn't a goodbye that promised future meetings or hinted at possibilities down the road. It was a genuine closing of a chapter, an acknowledgement that our brief connection, however meaningful, had reached its natural conclusion. As I walked out of the classroom for the last time, the book pressed against my heart. I felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness for what couldn't be, gratitude for what had been, and a new sense of confidence in who I was and who I might become. Mr. Carter, Daniel, had seen me, truly seen me, and in doing so, had helped me see myself more clearly. That gift, I realized, was perhaps more valuable than any romantic possibility could have been. In the weeks that followed, as life returned to normal with Mrs. Peterson back at the helm of English class, I found myself thinking of Mr. Carter often, not with the aching longing I had initially expected, but with a warm appreciation for the brief but significant role he had played in my life. Jamie, ever observant, noticed the change in me. "You seem different," he commented one day as we worked on our project, which had evolved into a thoughtful examination of identity and authenticity in both The Great Gatsby and modern social media. "More confident, somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I understand myself better now." "Because of him?" Jamie asked gently. "Partly," I said after a moment's reflection. "But also because of me, because of how I handled everything. I was honest about my feelings. I respected boundaries even when they were painful, and I learned that being seen and understood, even briefly, is powerful." Jamie smiled, squeezing my shoulder. "Look at you, all grown up and philosophical." Mr. Carter would be proud, and I believed he would be. Not because I was pining for him or idealizing our connection, but because I was taking the best parts of our brief intersection, the mutual respect, the intellectual curiosity, the courage to be authentic, and carrying them forward into my life. 3 months later, as I was browsing in a bookstore downtown, I came across a flyer for a creative writing workshop at the local community college. The instructor's name caught my eye immediately, Daniel Carter. According to the flyer, he had recently accepted a position as an adjunct professor of creative writing at the college and would be offering evening workshops open to the community. I stood there, staring at the flyer, a swirl of emotions rising within me. It wasn't a sign or a cosmic intervention, just a coincidence, the kind that happens in a small university town where academic paths often cross. But it felt significant nonetheless, a reminder that life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. I didn't sign up for the workshop. It was too soon, the boundaries still too fresh, the potential complications too real. But I kept the flyer, tucking it into my copy of Norwegian Wood alongside his inscription. Perhaps someday, when I was no longer a high school student, when the teacher-student dynamic was firmly in the past, our paths might cross again in a context where possibilities weren't constrained by roles and responsibilities. Or perhaps they wouldn't, and this chapter would remain complete in itself, a brief but meaningful connection that helped shape who I was becoming. Either way, I was grateful for the substitute teacher who had paused at my name, smiled, and in doing so, had helped me begin to understand the person I truly was and the person I might someday become. Total _char_count, 18,624.